Marcus Thompson had been cleaning the offices of Meridian Technologies for 12 years, arriving each evening at 6 p.m. after the last programmer had left and working methodically through the night until the first employees returned at 7 a.m. At 62 years old, he moved through the gleaming Manhattan offices with the quiet efficiency of someone who had perfected the art of being invisible, emptying trash cans, vacuuming carpets, and maintaining the pristine environment that the company's brilliant young engineers took for granted. To the employees and executives of Meridian Technologies, Marcus was simply part of the building's infrastructure, no more noteworthy than the air conditioning system or the high-speed internet connection. They passed him in hallways without acknowledgement, held confidential conversations in his presence as if he weren't there, and left sensitive documents scattered across their desks, secure in the assumption that a janitor couldn't possibly understand the complex financial algorithms and trading systems that had made Meridian one of Wall Street's most powerful technology companies. What none of them knew was that Marcus Thompson held a PhD in computer science from MIT, had been a senior software architect at IBM for 15 years, and had designed some of the earliest high-frequency trading systems before a series of personal tragedies had derailed his career and left him working nights to support his disabled wife and pay for his daughter's medical school tuition. The irony of his situation wasn't lost on Marcus. During his cleaning rounds, he observed the same types of coding errors, security vulnerabilities, and architectural flaws that he had spent decades helping Fortune 500 companies avoid. He watched brilliant young programmers repeat mistakes that had been solved in the 1990s, saw critical systems held together with amateur patches, and witnessed security practices that would have been considered reckless even by the standards of his early career. Marcus had learned to keep his observations to himself. His previous attempts to offer suggestions had been met with condescension or outright hostility from programmers who couldn't imagine that a janitor might understand their work. The few times he had tried to point out obvious problems, he had been told to focus on his cleaning duties and leave the technology to the experts. The CEO, Jonathan Sterling, embodied everything that Marcus found frustrating about the modern tech industry. Brilliant but arrogant, successful but lacking wisdom, surrounded by yes men who were afraid to challenge his assumptions or question his decisions. On a particularly cold February evening, Marcus was cleaning the executive floor when he noticed that CEO Jonathan Sterling had left his computer unlocked and displaying what appeared to be the core trading algorithm that powered Meridian's most profitable operations. Company policy strictly prohibited leaving workstations unsecured, but executives often ignored rules that they expected others to follow religiously. As Marcus emptied Sterling's wastebasket, he couldn't help but glance at the code displayed on the massive monitor. What he saw made his blood run cold. The algorithm contained a fundamental flaw in its risk calculation engine, a subtle but catastrophic error that miscalculated position sizes during periods of high market volatility. The bug was hidden deep in a recursive function that handled exponential smoothing, making it nearly impossible to detect during normal market conditions. Marcus recognized the error pattern from his early career at IBM, where a similar flaw had nearly caused a major financial institution to lose billions of dollars during a market correction in 1998. The mathematics were complex, but the basic problem was simple. Under certain market conditions, the algorithm would interpret declining asset values as buying opportunities and continue increasing position sizes until the firm's entire capital base was at risk. The more Marcus studied the code, the more horrified he became. Meridian Technologies managed over $500 billion in assets for pension funds, insurance companies, and sovereign wealth funds. If the algorithm triggered during a significant market downturn, It could cause losses that would ripple through the entire global financial system, potentially triggering the kind of systemic crisis that had devastated the economy in 2008. Marcus faced an impossible choice. He could report what he had discovered, knowing that his observations would be dismissed and that he would likely be fired for looking at confidential information. Or he could remain silent and hope that the specific market conditions required to trigger the flaw would never occur, knowing that his silence made him complicit in a potential disaster. The decision was made more complex by Marcus's deep understanding of financial markets and algorithmic trading. He knew that the current market environment, with rising inflation, geopolitical tensions, and unprecedented monetary policy, created exactly the conditions where such a flaw could be triggered. The next morning, Marcus arrived an hour early for his shift, hoping to catch Sterling before the office became busy with the usual chaos of the trading day. He had spent the night preparing a careful explanation of the flaw he had discovered, writing out the mathematical proofs and creating diagrams that would help Sterling understand the severity of the situation without revealing the full extent of his own technical knowledge. When Sterling arrived at his office at 6:30 a.m., he found Marcus waiting with a manila folder containing printouts and handwritten notes. Sterling's initial reaction was irritation at finding his janitor in his office before business hours. But Marcus's earnest demeanor and obvious preparation convinced him to listen to what appeared to be concerns about building security or maintenance issues. As Marcus began explaining what he had discovered, Sterling's expression shifted from patience to confusion to amusement. The idea that his janitor was attempting to lecture him about algorithmic trading and risk management struck Sterling as absurd. He interrupted Marcus's careful explanation with condescending comments about staying in one's lane and focusing on janitorial duties rather than matters beyond his understanding. Sterling's dismissive attitude was reinforced by his chief technology officer, David Chen, who arrived early and witnessed the tail end of Marcus's presentation. Chen, a 34-year-old MIT graduate who had joined Meridian directly from Google, was even less receptive than Sterling to the idea that a janitor could identify problems that had escaped the attention of his team of elite programmers. The meeting ended with Sterling laughing at what he characterized as Marcus's cute attempt to understand grown-up work, and suggesting that Marcus should focus on keeping the offices clean rather than trying to play computer programmer. Chen added his own dismissive comments about the complexity of modern financial systems being beyond the comprehension of someone without proper training. Marcus left the meeting feeling humiliated and frustrated, but also increasingly convinced that his analysis was correct. Sterling's dismissive attitude and Chen's arrogance had prevented them from even examining the evidence Marcus had prepared, ensuring that the flaw would remain hidden until market conditions triggered its activation. Over the following weeks, Marcus watched with growing anxiety as global financial markets began displaying the exact patterns that would trigger the flaw he had discovered in Meridian's trading algorithm. Rising interest rates were creating stress in bond markets. Geopolitical tensions were increasing volatility in commodity prices, and emerging market currencies were beginning to show signs of instability. Marcus's understanding of financial markets, developed during his years at IBM working with major financial institutions, allowed him to recognize that the current environment was particularly dangerous for algorithmic trading systems. The combination of low liquidity, high volatility, and correlated asset movements created conditions where small errors in risk calculations could be amplified into catastrophic losses. Meanwhile, Meridian Technologies was having its most profitable quarter in company history. Sterling had been featured on the cover of 3 business magazines, praising his innovative approach to quantitative trading and his firm's ability to generate consistent returns regardless of market conditions. The financial press had dubbed him the algorithm king and speculated about his potential IPO that could value the company at over $50 billion. The success was making Sterling increasingly confident in his systems and dismissive of any suggestions for caution or additional risk controls. During company meetings, he frequently mentioned the failed prediction by even the janitor that their systems had problems, using Marcus's warning as an example of how uninformed opinions could create unnecessary worry about proven technologies. Chen had used the incident to reinforce security protocols, implementing new policies that prevented non-technical staff from accessing areas where computer screens might display sensitive information. The new rules were presented as necessary precautions against corporate espionage, but everyone understood that they were really designed to prevent embarrassing situations like the janitor's attempt to critique the company's core technology. Marcus continued his nightly cleaning routine, but now he paid careful attention to the trading floor monitors and risk management displays that he could observe during his work. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. The algorithm was indeed making increasingly aggressive trades as market volatility increased, and the risk management systems were failing to account for the correlation patterns that made those trades dangerous. On a Thursday evening in late March, Marcus noticed unusual activity on the trading floor. Several risk managers were working late, clustered around monitors displaying volatility charts and correlation matrices that showed troubling patterns in global markets. The conversations he overheard suggested that some traders were beginning to question whether their risk models were properly accounting for current market conditions. However, these concerns were being overruled by senior management, who pointed to the firm's continued profitability as evidence that their systems were performing correctly. Sterling had specifically instructed his risk management team to avoid panic reactions to short-term market volatility, emphasizing that Meridian's competitive advantage came from staying committed to their quantitative models when less sophisticated competitors were being driven by emotion. Marcus recognized that the firm was approaching the exact market conditions that would trigger the algorithmic flaw. The mathematical models he had studied decades earlier at MIT, combined with his practical experience from the IBM years, gave him a unique perspective on how complex systems failed during periods of extreme stress. That night, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Rather than simply observing and worrying, he would take direct action to prevent the disaster he saw approaching. His plan was risky and would certainly cost him his job, but his conscience couldn't bear the weight of remaining silent while a preventable catastrophe approached. Using his access to the building's computer systems, ostensibly for reporting maintenance issues and scheduling cleaning supplies, Marcus began documenting the specific code modules and configuration files that contained the flawed risk calculations. His plan was to create an irrefutable technical analysis that would force Sterling and Chen to acknowledge the problem before it was too late. Marcus worked through the weekend, using his encyclopedic knowledge of financial mathematics and his still sharp programming skills to prepare a comprehensive report that detailed not only the specific flaw, but also its potential impact under various market scenarios. The report included proposed fixes and recommendations for additional safeguards that would prevent similar problems in the future. On Monday morning, Marcus would make one final attempt to warn Sterling about the approaching disaster. This time, he would present evidence so compelling and detailed that even Sterling's arrogance couldn't dismiss it. Marcus's second attempt to warn Sterling was even more carefully planned than his first. He had prepared a 30-page technical report that detailed the algorithmic flaw with mathematical precision, included historical examples of similar failures, and provided specific recommendations for immediate remediation. The report was written in the formal style of academic computer science papers, complete with citations and mathematical proofs that would be familiar to anyone with serious technical training. When Marcus requested a meeting with Sterling, he was initially refused by the CEO's assistant, who had been instructed to prevent any repeat of the janitor incident that had become a source of amusement among the executive team. However, Marcus's persistence and his mention of critical security vulnerabilities eventually convinced Sterling to grant him 5 minutes, primarily so that he could be dismissed definitively and permanently. Sterling's office was packed with senior executives when Marcus arrived, including Chen, the head of risk management, and several other department heads who had been invited to witness what Sterling expected to be an entertaining display of misguided enthusiasm from an employee who didn't understand his place in the organization. Marcus began his presentation with a calm explanation of his background and qualifications, revealing for the first time his PhD from MIT and his 15 years of experience at IBM. The revelation created a moment of stunned silence in the room, as executives struggled to reconcile their image of Marcus as a simple janitor with the credentials he was describing. However, Sterling quickly recovered his composure and dismissed Marcus's background as irrelevant to current circumstances. He argued that whatever skills Marcus might have possessed in the past were clearly outdated, given that he was working as a janitor rather than in a technical role. The other executives in the room took their cue from Sterling's dismissive attitude, treating Marcus's presentation as an amusing distraction rather than a serious technical discussion. Chen was particularly hostile, suggesting that Marcus's claims about his background were probably fabricated and that his technical analysis was likely copied from internet sources rather than representing genuine understanding. The meeting ended with Sterling explicitly forbidding Marcus from accessing any computer systems or technical areas of the building and threatening termination if he continued to interfere with business operations. That evening, Marcus made the most difficult decision of his life. Convinced that a financial catastrophe was imminent and that conventional channels had failed, he decided to take direct action to disable the flawed algorithm before it could trigger a systemic crisis. His plan was technically complex, but conceptually simple. He would use his building access and his deep understanding of computer systems to modify the trading algorithm's risk parameters, forcing it to reduce position sizes until the underlying flaw could be properly addressed. Marcus's years of observing Meridian's security practices had revealed numerous vulnerabilities that the company's IT staff had overlooked. Like many technology companies, Meridian focused primarily on external threats while paying little attention to insider risks, especially from employees who were considered too low-level to pose any danger to critical systems. Using his maintenance access to the building's network infrastructure, Marcus was able to identify and exploit several security weaknesses that allowed him to gain administrative access to the trading systems. His approach was methodical and careful, designed to modify the algorithm's behavior without creating obvious evidence of unauthorized access that would trigger immediate investigation. The modifications Marcus implemented were subtle but effective. He adjusted the algorithm's risk sensitivity parameters, increased position size limitations, and modified the correlation calculations that controlled how the system responded to market volatility. These changes would force the algorithm to behave more conservatively without completely disabling it, buying time for Meridian's technical team to discover and fix the underlying flaw. Marcus also planted carefully crafted log entries and documentation that would help investigators understand what had been done and why, ensuring that the modifications could be traced back to the original algorithmic flaw rather than appearing to be random sabotage. His goal was to create a situation where Meridian's technical team would be forced to conduct a thorough audit of their risk management systems. The entire operation took Marcus 3 nights to complete, working carefully during the quiet hours when building security was minimal and the risk of discovery was lowest. By Friday morning, the modified algorithm was in place and would begin affecting trading operations when markets opened. Monday morning brought exactly the market conditions that Marcus had feared. A coordinated sell-off in Asian markets triggered by unexpected economic data from China, followed by currency instability that spread through European trading sessions and arrived in New York as a full-scale panic. Under normal circumstances, Meridian's algorithm would have interpreted the declining asset prices as buying opportunities and begun increasing position sizes just as market volatility reached dangerous levels. Instead, the modified algorithm responded conservatively, maintaining existing positions while avoiding the aggressive buying that would have amplified the firm's exposure to crashing markets. While other quantitative trading firms suffered massive losses as their algorithms drove them deeper into falling markets, Meridian's modified systems kept the firm's losses manageable and prevented the kind of catastrophic failure that Marcus had predicted. However, the conservative behavior of Meridian's algorithm created its own problems. Sterling and his team immediately recognized that their systems were not performing as designed, and emergency meetings were called to investigate why their most profitable trading strategies had suddenly become risk-averse. Chen's technical team began frantically analyzing their code, looking for bugs or unauthorized modifications that could explain the unexpected behavior. The investigation initially focused on external hacking attempts and cybersecurity threats, as the possibility that their systems had been modified from within seemed impossible given their security protocols. However, the sophisticated nature of the modifications and their deep integration with the algorithm's core risk management functions gradually led investigators to conclude that the changes had been made by someone with intimate knowledge of their systems. Meanwhile, financial markets continued to deteriorate throughout the week, with several major algorithmic trading firms reporting catastrophic losses as their systems amplified market volatility rather than providing stability. News reports began focusing on the role of algorithmic trading in exacerbating market crashes, and regulatory agencies announced investigations into high-frequency trading practices. Meridian's relative stability during the market chaos attracted attention from competitors and financial journalists who couldn't understand how Sterling's firm had avoided the algorithmic disasters that had devastated other quantitative trading companies. Sterling found himself in the uncomfortable position of being praised for risk management practices that he didn't understand and couldn't explain. As Meridian's technical team delved deeper into their systems, they began to uncover the extent and sophistication of the modifications that had been made to their trading algorithm. The changes were so skillfully implemented that they appeared to be the work of someone with expert-level knowledge of both financial mathematics and software architecture, leading investigators to suspect corporate espionage or the involvement of a hostile nation-state. Chen brought in external cybersecurity consultants and forensic specialists to help trace the source of the unauthorized access. The investigation revealed that the modifications had been made using legitimate administrative credentials accessed through the building's network infrastructure, suggesting that the perpetrator had physical access to Meridian's offices and detailed knowledge of their security systems. The breakthrough came when forensic analysts discovered that the modifications included detailed documentation explaining the mathematical reasoning behind each change. The documentation was written in a style that suggested the author was trying to educate rather than simply sabotage. and included references to academic papers and industry best practices that revealed deep expertise in algorithmic trading systems. Most significantly, the documentation included explicit warnings about a fundamental flaw in Meridian's original risk calculation engine, complete with mathematical proofs demonstrating how the flaw could be triggered by specific market conditions. The analysis was so thorough and accurate that Chen's team was forced to acknowledge that their core algorithm did indeed contain the exact vulnerability that the mystery hacker had described. As the investigation narrowed its focus to individuals with both technical expertise and building access, Marcus Thompson emerged as an unexpected suspect. Background checks revealed his MIT PhD and IBM experience, information that had never been included in his employment file when he was hired as a janitor. Security footage showed that Marcus had been present in areas of the building where unauthorized network access had occurred. When confronted with the evidence, Marcus made no attempt to deny his involvement. Instead, he presented Sterling and Chen with the same technical analysis he had tried to share weeks earlier, along with detailed logs showing exactly what modifications he had made and why they had been necessary to prevent a catastrophic market failure. The meeting where Marcus confessed to modifying Meridian's trading algorithm was unlike anything Sterling had experienced in his career. Faced with irrefutable evidence that his janitor had not only identified a critical flaw in their most important system, but had also implemented a sophisticated fix that had saved the company from bankruptcy, Sterling was forced to confront the magnitude of his own arrogance and the consequences of his dismissive attitude. Chen's analysis confirmed that Marcus's modifications had indeed prevented what would have been a catastrophic failure during the previous week's market volatility. The original algorithm would have increased Meridian's positions by over 400% during the market crash, potentially creating losses of $50 billion or more and triggering the kind of systemic financial crisis that regulators had been warning about for years. The revelation that a janitor had saved Wall Street from a potential meltdown created a media sensation that dominated financial news for weeks. Marcus's story resonated with a public that had grown cynical about the financial industry's arrogance and risk-taking, while also highlighting the dangerous instability created by algorithmic trading systems that few people fully understood. Sterling faced intense pressure from Meridian's board of directors, investors, and regulatory agencies to explain how such a critical flaw had gone undetected by his highly paid technical team. The fact that the problem had been identified and solved by a janitor raised serious questions about the company's risk management practices and the competence of its leadership. Marcus's heroic intervention also created legal and ethical dilemmas that had no clear precedent. While he had technically committed computer fraud by accessing systems without authorization, his actions had prevented a disaster that could have destabilized the global financial system. Prosecutors struggled with the question of whether to charge someone whose criminal behavior had served the public interest. The financial industry's response was equally complex. While many executives privately acknowledged that Marcus had performed a public service, they also worried about the precedent set by his actions and the implications for cybersecurity and employee oversight throughout the industry. The aftermath of Marcus's revelation transformed both his life and the broader conversation about algorithmic trading, corporate culture, and the value of diverse perspectives in technical decision-making. Rather than facing criminal charges, Marcus found himself at the center of a public relations campaign that positioned him as a whistleblower and public servant who had risked his career to protect the financial system. Sterling, meanwhile, faced the consequences of his arrogance and poor judgment. Meridian's board of directors forced his resignation, citing his failure to maintain adequate risk controls and his dismissive treatment of legitimate safety concerns. The company's IPO was indefinitely postponed, and several major clients withdrew their assets, questioning whether Meridian could be trusted with their investments. Chen also departed the company, unable to overcome the embarrassment of having his expertise challenged successfully by someone he had dismissed as unqualified. His departure sparked industry-wide discussions about the dangers of technical arrogance and the importance of creating cultures where concerns could be raised and evaluated regardless of their source. Marcus was offered numerous high-paying positions at competing firms, regulatory agencies, and consulting companies that wanted to capitalize on his expertise and public profile. However, he chose to accept a position as Chief Risk Officer at a mid-sized investment firm that specialized in developing more stable and transparent algorithmic trading systems. His new role allowed Marcus to implement the lessons learned from his experience at Meridian, creating risk management systems that prioritize stability and transparency over maximum profitability. His work became a model for other firms seeking to balance algorithmic efficiency with systemic safety. The Meridian incident also prompted regulatory changes that required algorithmic trading firms to implement more robust oversight systems and to create channels for employees at all levels to report potential safety concerns. Marcus's story became a case study in business schools and risk management programs, illustrating the importance of intellectual humility and diverse perspectives in technical decision-making. Most importantly, Marcus's experience demonstrated that expertise and insight could come from unexpected sources, and that dismissing concerns based on job titles or social status could have catastrophic consequences. His courage in speaking truth to power, even at great personal risk, inspired others throughout the financial industry to prioritize systemic safety over personal advancement. The man who had been invisible for 12 years became a symbol of the critical importance of listening to voices that might otherwise be ignored, proving that sometimes the most important insights come from those who observe quietly from the margins, rather than those who command attention from the center of power.